Good afternoon. I am Ali Ahmida, Professor of Political Science at the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences at UNE, and this is UNE 2024 Constitution Day. We have been having this day for the last probably 15 years, or maybe more, because we are required by the Department of Education to have this day. And the history of Constitution Day, as I always introduce it to our students, especially new students and faculty, it goes back to the year 2005. Senator Jim Byrd of West Virginia, who was a constitutional scholar, coming in, Davis, coming in. I think students are coming. The Senator Byrd, who I said was constitutional scholar, was alarmed in his opinion that many of our youth, many of our students, they don't know the American Constitution. So he pushed through our Congress, an amendment or a congressional motion requiring all colleges and universities in the United States, especially the one that receives, the colleges that receive grants from the federal government, to have a Constitution Day around September 17th. Maybe before one day or later, as in our case. Wednesday is the only day we could find, me and Emily Potter, our assistant, and we have organized this event every day because of this requirement. Now, what we do at UNE is a little bit more interesting, I hope, and you guys will agree with that. Most of my colleagues in other universities, when they are asked to do this function, and again, I said, we are audited by the educational department, and we have to report to the department about our event every year. They really are, they roll their eyes, they say, oh God, Ali, this is really a boring bureaucratic requirement, why we have to do it. But it could be boring and bureaucratic. At UNE, we try to make it interesting, and we turn this day, Constitution Day, as a forum for conversations, for debates about our Constitution, and also raising panels, organizing panels, raising issues, and also new problems that society is debating, our elite are debating, and we know at some point or another, like in this case, immigration at our southern borders, will reach our Supreme Court. So either directly or indirectly, we could address the Constitution Day. And the way I think about it is to broaden Constitution Day to have these conversations, this way of thinking, so it will be not just a legal debate or interpretation or introduction. Why should we care about our Constitution? That's the only one that probably unify us as a country of immigrants. But at the same time, raise debates, contentious issues, and a new emerging problems that the Constitution in the past did not address, or new problems that have a new manifestation, new challenges because of all kind of demographic, economic, international, military, or societal changes. So at UNE, I would claim that we make this Constitution Day very interesting for us and primarily for our students. The attendance today was a little bit smaller than in the past, but that's okay. Thanks to David and Lee, we are recording this event and streamlining it right now. So some of our students, our faculty and staff and other people in the community, they can log in and view the event today that we are organizing for the year 2024. Why the election? I called the theme of today the immigration crisis and the presidential election. Let's break that up. What do we mean by the crisis, immigration crisis? As you know, right now, and if you haven't been following the news, the last debate between former President Donald Trump and the Vice President Kamala Harris, to a larger degree, was about this crisis. And the question is what they are saying and what's behind what they are saying. President Trump's favorite theme is the security of our southern borders, which is a real issue. And he tried to highlight the claim that this is really a problem facing the country. We have hordes of criminals, drug traffickers, rapists, and in the case of the state of Ohio, now this whole issue was focusing on the city of Springfield, that immigrants who have been coming to the city in Ohio from Haiti, Haitian immigrants are eating dogs, cats, and pets. And the governor of Ohio denied that. The manager of the city of Springfield denied that, and also the mayor. And they said there is no evidence for it. But this is really making the immigration crisis is more current, more visible in the national level. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden try to highlight other aspects, humanitarian and legal attempts to coordinate in the Congress with the Republican rivals to find a compromise on how to deal with the crisis, and also the dealing maybe with earlier. Let's try to find if we could help the countries that these immigrants are coming from to deal with it, and maybe help them by giving aid, coordinating with them in terms of assistance. So people who are leaving in thousands and thousands from these countries coming to our southern borders will be declining and also resolve the problem. That hasn't happened. So the crisis is really, really important. Now, to just give you a brief background about this before I introduce our speaker, my colleagues, Professor Rob Alegre. In the last this problem is not new. It was even worse 3 years ago. And this is not just an American problem. Europe has been dealing with it, with millions of people coming from Syria, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Bangladesh, from Egypt, or from sub-Saharan Africa, from everywhere. So what we are dealing with is part of a larger problem, but let's not minimize it. This is a huge problem. Just to give you an idea about the number, in the year 2023, the number of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers in our Mexican borders reach, in some estimate, 3 million, and another number said at least 2.5 million people are at the borders of southern borders of the United States of America. Now, of course, people won't come from the two oceans. That will be too far to swim or to take a boat. So what you do, and Canada in the north will be, of course, very, very complicated because of geography and also the distance. So Mexico, the Mexican borders, the long Mexican borders, is really the place that every asylum seeker, refugee, try to reach, these borders and try to enter the United States of America. So we're talking about real problem. And if you look, because of the, the stalemate in our Congress and what to do with the southern border crisis, we have no resolution. And I think everybody blaming the other side for its problem. And even the Democratic Party is really at a loss because the problem persisted until now. And the problem spilled over to our current presidential election, as I said, but also some governors, conservative governors, Republican governor, like the governor of Texas, the governor of Florida. They have been sending immigrants to our big cities, and especially our so-called, our liberal cities, San Francisco, New York City, and other places. And these cities have been really dealing with billions and billions costs of resettling and taking care of these refugees. So we are not talking about a minor problem, even though it's the year 2023, as I checked, the number declined. This is a real national issue. It will not go away. What are the solutions are proposing both sides? The Democratic side tried to find a compromise in Congress, but the Congress is really also divided and deal with our legal and constitutional arrangement and courts to deal with asylum seekers, but the number is overwhelming. The number is overwhelming. Former President Donald Trump has more extremist, in my opinion, a solution that's populist, sensational, but really will harsh in the sense that he wants to deport people. He wants to, earlier, when he was a president, he started building a wall, and he had a draconian policy and banning some people, especially Muslims, people of Muslim faith and citizenship from different countries. He want to ban them. And he threatened to do the same thing, that if he becomes a president, he wanted to deport, thousands, if not a million of people who are illegally in the United States. But also, how to balance the fact that we have laws and we need to protect our security. You don't have to agree with the President Trump. There is a problem. We have to admit that, but how to deal with that in a humane, legal way, that's the challenge for the next president. And the second point that also important for us to think of, because it's not going to go away, is the problem that even though the number declined, the asylum seekers and the refugees number, unfortunately, will require not only an American solution, an international solution in many ways. Now, I'm going to stop here and tell you very quickly, when I checked about the vast majority of the refugees and asylum seekers and people who are coming to our southern borders, and I discovered that they are coming from these countries, primary countries: Mexico, Guatemala, Venezuela, Cuba, Ecuador, and Colombia. And I decided that my friend and colleague, Professor Rob Alegre, who is a Chilean-American and a professor of Latin American history at UNE, will be the person who is really best equipped and qualified to tell us a little bit more, something more, and something is missing from the debate about in this current election about these refugees and the crisis itself. Who are these people who are coming? Why they are coming from these countries? And what do we need to know about their background? Are they, as Trump is telling us, that they are criminals and rapists and drug traffickers? Or the vast majority are ordinary people fleeing for their lives for economic, political, or environmental reasons coming to the prosperous country, the United States? This is the question where probably as a university we'll go beyond the sensationalism and the politicization of the economic crisis that our society is dealing with. And I wanted Rob to share with us his insights and give us some background so we go beyond the sensationalism and the politicization. Professor Rob Alegre is a Chilean-American professor of Latin American history in the School of Arts and Humanities at UNE. He is a scholar of modern Mexico. He wrote his first book, which based on his dissertation on the railroad labor movement, radicals in Mexico. His specialty at the intersection of class, gender, and also, what else, Rob? Class, gender, and what?
A lot of memory stuff.
And memory. Memory means that the struggle over the histories, whether that's state history or local histories, in that sense. So this is a very, very it's a very important book, and right now he's translating a major book by a Mexican feminist, and I think he's almost done with that translation. And I know he is also engaged in a more ambitious book about the history of self-determination and the hidden history of that period, which is I'm very excited about that project and what he will find out later on in his third or maybe second scholarly work. I will, without further ado, I will ask my colleague Rob Alegre to share with us his insights and tell us about, go in more depth about the immigrants and why they're coming to the southern borders and where he thinks we could go away from this crisis, how to resolve it. Rob.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much, Professor Ahmida, for that wonderful introduction, all of you for coming, and all the many hundreds of you back home who are live streaming, will be seeing this. I'm very excited to be a part of the Constitution Day and in the immigration conversation. My family are immigrants, and as you were explaining the depth of the problem and how people are reacting, I thought of my Aunt Maritza. Maritza called my mother who lives with me the other day, and she was complaining about the immigrants in her neighborhood. Maritza is an immigrant. Maritza came here in 1980. She grew up in Chile, and she went to Spain, and she's calling my mom, who's also an immigrant. In fact, all of their brothers and sisters are immigrants. And Maritza's on the phone saying, you can't believe how horrible New York City is with all the immigrants. New York City, the city of immigrants. And she lives not in Park Slope, not in a fancy neighborhood. She lives in Spanish Harlem, which is full of immigrants. So she is an immigrant who's complaining about other immigrants. And that is a very classic thing that happened. And when people think of, there's a lot of news about Latinos voting for Trump, that is one of the dynamics that exists, is Latinos who are now citizens or who have residency and who look at other immigrants as the other. And that's a classic thing. So it is a very, very big problem. New York is not on the border, as you know. But because of the mass refugee crisis, we have refugees here in Maine, right? And this is very taxing on infrastructure, on where you're going to live, on going to school, right? Maine has a ton of new immigrant students in school. This is happening in various places in the country. And so it is very taxing. From the level of a national level, immigration is a national security issue. So when you hear politicians talk about immigration as a problem of, the threats that are coming in, It's because immigration has always been a national security issue, because you have to secure your borders. That's a basic part of any nation state, regardless of where you are. We, as Ali pointed out, as a country, have the advantage geographically of having two oceans, right? And then a very long border of the north where it's not very populated. So it's our southern border where we concentrate more. But it is a national security issue. It's also an issue about identity, right? Who do you want to be considered to be part of your country? And I'm here, in what we all know about in Europe, there's a lot of issues even stronger than here about maintaining French culture, right? Maintaining the culture of the country. We're a nation of immigrants, so we tend to downplay that kind of talk, but there's still how is this going to affect American culture, right? How is it going to affect? Then there's also, the national identity. And then, of course, there's economic policy, which is tied to national security, but is separate. How will immigration affect economics? And that's tricky there, because in economics is oftentimes where you find strange bedfellows, like a Republican who's pro-immigration, because it cheapens labor costs, and a Democrat who's pro-immigration. So a lot of times that's where there's a little bit of overlap. All right. All right. So what I wanted to start, like Ali, I wanted to start with the global issue. And right there, I have some images on the board, and those are images of people fleeing and going into different parts of Europe during 2015. The 2015 migration crisis in Europe led to a great deal of reactionary, great deal of people in countries where immigrants were coming into reacting. Right? And the most prominent, I think, one of the ones that is really significant for us is Hungary. Yeah, so you have Haiti, and you see where they're coming in, people dying. So this was a huge humanitarian crisis, a human rights crisis. But from the perspective of the countries, it's also a national security crisis. Why would it be a national security crisis for immigrants to come in, whether it is in Hungary, Germany, or in the United States? The national security issue can develop in a few ways. One, how do I know people who are coming in do not work for foreign governments? Right? How do I know that someone coming in doesn't work for the U.S. State Department, let's say, or for the Mexican, let's say the U.S. border, for the Mexican government, right, and just trying to overthrow? How do I know they're not terrorists? How do I know they're not terrorists? Number two, right? A classic one is, how do I know they're not bringing in disease? If anybody you're my age, you saw Godfather Part 2, Vito Corleone gets checked out at Ellis Island for what? For TB, right? And people who are sick are then quarantined. That's a national security issue. So it is a very legitimate issue, is who is coming into this country, right? And so Hungary responded very aggressively in creating a border, right? And the prime minister of Hungary, here's his name, Viktor Orban, right? This is in 2017. So in 2016, Hungary constructs a and then they double down in 2017. This is it's Europe, but this is a prime minister who is very much on the authoritarian end of the political spectrum. This figure becomes very important to us living in the United States because he becomes basically a model for Donald Trump. And in fact, Donald Trump has very much, very publicly talked about how fantastic, how fantastic job they're doing in Hungary. And his big plan, one of his big plans, is to create this massive border wall. Obviously, border wall has existed for a long time, but there are many patches on the U.S.-Mexican border that are not, in fact, there's no barrier, because there might be a little river, a river, some kind of natural thing there that they can't build a wall, or nobody lives there. So the idea is to just secure, it's about 2,000 miles is what it is. And so again, he's looking at what they're doing in Europe. In Europe itself, not only do you have what I just mentioned, Hungary, but now Germany just this week has announced that it's going to tighten its borders. It's already got tightened borders with Eastern Europe, with Czechoslovakia, Hungary, etc. But now Germany is going to tighten its borders with France, with Belgium, etc. just this past, just a little while ago in July, August, there was in the UK, which is not passing draconian laws, but there is an anti-immigrant and largely anti-Muslim movement. And I think you can call it a movement because they're organizing and they're disrupting, who are calling for draconian laws against immigration. So you have the West, which is supposed to be the bedrock of democracy, having this rise in authoritarianism. And so what you see here in the United States is part of this movement. Now, one of those things that Trump did say when he announced, his ideas in immigration, and you might recall this, he said about Mexicans not sending their best. Do you remember that? Mexicans are not sending their best. They're sending drug dealers and rapists and all these horrible people. And one of the things that does exist in this is Central America, is organized gang violence at a scale that we've never seen before. In some of these communities in El Salvador, the gangs could even run the communities. These gangs are transnational gangs. So many of them have members. Well, the famous one is MS-13. They have a huge membership in Los Angeles and parts of California and other parts of the West. Here in Maine, you may not, we don't see it. They're not so much present on the East Coast. They are on the East Coast, but not as present. But if you're listening to Trump and you live in a community where there is a presence of Latino gangs, even if it's not from, you wouldn't necessarily know, that really does have an effect. Obviously, you say, well, yeah, I do see people who are coming in and committing crimes, right? And in fact, when we talk about what Central Americans are running away from, many of them are running away from communities that are not governed. They're not governed because they are infiltrated by gangs. That's very much a case in Central America. In Mexico, as I put up the map. So here's the map of Mexico. Now, what's happened in Mexico is a real tragedy because Mexico, it used to be that the most dangerous place in Mexico was always Mexico City. Mexico City is now considered to be one of the safer options because what you have are many communities and states in Mexico that are being run by the narcotraficantes, the narcos, drug dealers. Parts of the north, let's say in Monterrey, which Monterrey was always a very middle class city, are now being basically being bullied around by drug cartels. I'll give you just an example. I was staying outside of Mexico City. This was many years ago when it started. This started a long time ago. It started over 10 years ago, but it keeps getting worse. And I was in Mexico City, and I went out to get something to eat around 8 o'clock, and everything was closed. Actually, it was outside of Mexico City. Everything was closed. And I said, what's going on? Why? It was only 8 o'clock. And the guy said, you didn't hear? There's been a communique. The narco says that anybody who's out after 8, they can get shot. Now, this is in a major city. And I asked the guy, this was at a little convenience store, so where's the police? And he started laughing. He said, the police, they're afraid of the narcos. The narcos have better guns. And then not that long afterwards, in the morning, I woke up once, and there were, on the news, that there were people hanging from a bridge in a neighborhood where the cops would be. It was like a regular neighborhood. So that was about 14 thick years ago. That's what really started Mexico on this downhill. The narco gangs had been infiltrated by the police, and instead of them being afraid, they basically went all over the place. So instead of having one or two narco gangs, now you had all these competing gangs. And they've come, a city like right here is Acapulco. Acapulco was always a tourist city. Now Acapulco is very dangerous because of the narcos. Basically, if where you live is a narco route, it becomes a dangerous place. And so there are entire communities in northern Mexico that are run by the narcos. And say, for example, you're a local mayor and you don't support the narcos, your life could be on the line. Right? There have been cases where the narcos kill the police, and then they kill the police officer's family just to make a point. So the violence that people are escaping in Central America, they're escaping this gang violence and narco. It's tied to narco. And in Mexico, it's very strongly narco violence. In addition to that, there's a great deal of, what's always there is corruption and those types of things. But really, you're seeing the effect of the drug war. Yes, they're escaping violence. No, and I'll get to that in a little bit of how hard it is to get asylum. Here we have Venezuelans. Venezuelans are a group that in the past, if you grew up in the U.S., you probably didn't know a lot of Venezuelans. Venezuelans have never been a group that have migrated in great numbers. Why? Because Venezuela has petroleum. And so the Venezuelan economy has always been stronger than other economies, right? And they had governments that were, there was always corruption, but that were more stable. Venezuela now has a president who's a populist, Maduro. Many people are fleeing because they do not like his policies. Recently, he's become even more authoritarian. So people are fleeing from the authoritarian politics. Also, there's the issue of an embargo with Venezuela, and basically the Venezuelan economy, which has always been very strong because of the petroleum, is now being affected by various, trade barriers, if you will. So many people are leaving Venezuela, and the point that I want to make here is that it's not just the United States. The first place that they've been going to is other parts of South America. So a Venezuelan might first go to Colombia, then go to Ecuador, then go to Chile, and then realizing, they're not making it anywhere, then decide to go to the United States. They cross mountain ranges, rivers. To get to the United States from South America is extremely hard and dangerous. You have to cross through Colombia, Panama, El Salvador, Costa Rica, etc. Each one, you have to cross a border. For each one of those countries, you are a national security issue if you're a refugee, right? From a human rights perspective, you're a human, you have human rights. But from the perspective of Guatemala, the Venezuelan coming into Guatemala is a security issue. And so what are their different stances? Well, we know, as Ali said, that for Trump, his stance is the border and also deportation. Right. Trump has called for deportation, massive deportation, unlike anything seen in the United States before. What do we know about Kamala Harris? Well, Kamala Harris is in a lot of ways, she's the vice president. So she's going and continuing with Joe Biden's plan, deepening it. And what was the Biden proposal? Well, interestingly, we know very clearly because there was a border act of 2024 that President Biden was going to sign. It didn't pass, but this is what it says. It expands Homeland Security Authority to address U.S. non-nationals, gives money also. Among the provision, the bill provides DHS emergency authority to summarily remove or prohibit the entry of certain non-nationals within 100 miles of the southwest border. DHS may exercise this authority if it encounters an average of 4,000 non-nationals in a 7-day period. This was the Republican plan. This was the plan that Republicans wanted. During an election year, Joe Biden, very shrewdly, politicians we're going to co-opt the Republican plan. And we're going to pass a bill that no real Republican can vote against. Right? Trey Gowdy, former U.S. representative from South Carolina, no longer representative, a very strong Republican on the border, completely supported this plan. No Republicans voted for it. Democrats voted for it. What do you see there? The tone and the posture of the United States has turned more conservative. If the Republican plan is being voted on by Democrats, and the Republicans won't even vote on it because the President Trump, the former president, told them not to. This now becomes de facto Kamala Harris's. She inherits it from the Biden administration. people who are activists on the border, who are pro-human rights, see this as very dangerous because you can take someone who is a legitimate asylum seeker, right? And you can, with this law, say, you can't apply for asylum, we're just going to throw you back, right? It gives a tremendous amount of power to deport people. Tremendous amount of power, and all that needs to happen is there needs to be basically a numerical kind of switch. If there's more than a certain amount of people crossing, then you can now do that. So anyway, that's a big thing. If that had passed, it would have been the strongest legislation, on the border passed probably in U.S. history. All right, so that's one thing. We also know. All right, so this is the fact sheet that has been passed around a couple of years ago. That Kamala Harris is getting, again, she's inheriting it, and she was part of developing this. Right? She was part of developing this. When people say, well, what has Kamala Harris done? Actually, the immigration is one of the things that she had a lot of influence on because President Biden picked her to work on this. And the strategy is, one, addressing economic insecurity and inequality. The idea is for the U.S. government to get at the root cause of immigration. And the root cause, say Venezuela, would be economic insecurity. It's a little ironic because the United States is trying to strangle the economy of Venezuela. So, it's hard to, when you actually look at this, you think, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. But it looks, very, very strong, combating corruption. Right, tons of corruption. Now, in order to do that, you're gonna have to do something about the narcos. Right, a narco comes to you with $100,000 in cash and says you can either take this or you cannot take it and you'll be dead. It's pretty hard not to take. So the level you could think of the level of the challenge is huge. Strengthening democratic governments, rule of law, promoting respect for human rights, labor rights, and the free press. Obviously, if people's human rights are being abused, they're going to leave. But also labor rights, which I consider to be a human right. If someone in Mexico is getting paid $10 a day to clean someone's bathroom, and they're going to get paid $15 an hour in Arizona to clean someone's bathroom, the impetus, right, the push factor, the pull factor, is very strong for the person to leave Mexico. Right? Especially if they live in northern Mexico where it's super, very close to the border. Okay. So labor is very strong. Countering and preventing violence, extortion, and other crimes, criminal gangs, trafficking networks, and combating sexual, gender-based, and domestic violence. Many people, of course, are also leaving the violence of the home. Right? Women leaving horrible situations where they're in northern Mexico, there has been a femicide that we don't even talk about, where hundreds of women have been killed and no one knows what happened. There's been no, they haven't solved the crimes. Human trafficking becomes horrible during this times, where women are turned into, basically forced to prostitute themselves. And it's not always to prostitute, it could be forced labor, right? People brought in on false conditions. All right, good. I don't want to bore you all. So, all right. So, yeah. So this is, and she has now made this clear. She's kind of fixed it a little bit, developed it, if you will. So I did want to finish here with Haiti because it's been in the news, right? With Haiti and what was said about Haitians eating dogs and all of that horrible stuff. And what you have in Haiti is a couple of things. One is an infrastructure that's very poorly developed. And so in 2010, you'll recall there was a huge earthquake in 2010, and it ravaged Haiti. That same earthquake, I shouldn't say that same earthquake. In Chile, they had a higher level of earthquake. It was stronger. And in Chile, less than 100 people died. Because the Chilean government has standards about buildings. And in Chile, you cannot build a new building if it's not going to last after a hurricane, an earthquake. So the poverty of Haiti, right, the endemic poverty which leads to buildings not being built for earthquakes is an issue here. That's a structural issue that has led to people leaving in 2010. Then in 2017, more recently, there was the assassination of their president. And as you can see here, it says, Jovenel must go. And so popular society rose in Haiti. And in fact, there was someone who took basically, a local chieftain, a strongman, who decided that he was going to be the head of Haiti. And so a way to look at it is governance. Governance in Haiti collapsed, right? Governance collapsed. So when Kamala Harris says strengthen democratic governance, that's the kind of thing that they're referring to. Strengthen those institutions. Okay. I think, I have a lot more that I could say, obviously. I'll just end by saying this. I lived in the border area in 2000. I lived in Tucson, Arizona. And it is an entire culture over there in Arizona that we don't know about if you don't live there. Where if you live in the Mexican side and there's a fire on the U.S. side, the Mexicans will send their fire department, vice versa. You have Americans who cross the border to buy pharmaceuticals. I had friends who would cross the border to get their car fixed. The border is very fluid, right? And so the boat in a place like Arizona, when we think about the election, Arizona, Biden won it last time. And before that, there was no Democrat that won it since Bill Clinton in 96. Kamala Harris almost picked, is it Tim Scott? Tim Allen? It was Mike Allen, Mike Scott, one of the senator from Arizona, Democrat. She almost picked him as the running mate, you might recall, because the idea of securing Arizona. And she didn't. The astronaut, yeah, he's an astronaut. Mark Kelly, thank you, Mark Kelly. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there, and thank you.
Thank you, Rob, very much. This is a very, very lively summary of the background that we need to make sense of this crisis, and also know who are these immigrants coming to our borders, southern borders. Apparently, what I gathered from what Professor Alegre said, this problem is not going to go away, and this problem being kind of unresolved because the division between our Republican and Democratic parties today. And the challenge for all of us is really to press both parties, whoever will be elected in November, is to find a compromise and bipartisan solution, because we cannot, let's admit, even Democrats, if they are claiming that, that's not true. There is a problem. There is a border security problem. Of course, we have legal immigrants, and we have illegal immigrants that we need to resolve it in hopefully humane, visionary, bipartisan way. So this problem cannot be sensationalized or politicized in the country. We need to confront that issue when it would be used for winning the election, and try to look at a real short-term solution and maybe a vision for the future. I checked out, and there are 51 million Americans who were foreign-born, including Amy and me and a few others. Were you born in America?
I'm not American.
Yes, you're not. You're not. I am now. So there are a lot of Americans who were born in foreign countries. That's the point. Most of them came through legal system. It used to be very, very selective and also prejudiced and racist against certain groups. Northern European, Southern and East European were really excluded, and even Irish and Italian were not regarded as white. And after that, other countries. And we have a very, very convoluted history when it comes to this. But the fact is, as Professor Alegre articulated for us, and that's the strength of American society. We are an immigrant society. And this is a sign not of weakness, a sign of diversity and strength. Now, we hope that this crisis will not be passed or be manipulated to win an election, and there will be concrete, firm, yet also legal and democratic and humane way to deal with the vast majority of these immigrants who are not criminals. They are not rapists. Maybe there are some few minority of them like that who are slipped through it. But the vast majority of these immigrants, according to everything we know from reliable scholarly sources, there are people who are fleeing violence, fleeing environmental disasters and drought and change of rain and water resources, political oppression, civil wars. I mean, all of those wars that are raging are also contributing to that. And I think we need to look at that as well. But also, the country cannot survive just a flood of refugees without resolving that. So how to square that? That's really the challenge. And it will need a creative, non-partisan solution beyond this election, because this is not going to go away. As Europe and Professor Alegre mentioned, Europe also dealing with even more severe problem than even us. And the laws are changing for political asylum and allowing refugees to come to Europe, including a very generous country like Germany, now changing its laws. And the UK is changing its laws, and France also. So this is in a way, an international terrible crisis where people are fleeing from the southern hemisphere and eastern hemisphere to Europe and to Canada and the United States. It seems that Canada, who needs more immigrants, doesn't have the same severity that we have in America. But this is a problem that's not going to go away. So let me stop here, and we have the floor open for a few of your questions regarding what Professor Alegre has shared with us. And the floor is yours. And for some of you who haven't had some pizza, please, there's more pizza there. And grab some food as well. So let's entertain some questions and some comments.
I was going to say, as someone who's Jewish, I grew up in the Portland area. So Portland High School, as you may know, has, I think, 150 plus languages that are spoken during every day. And with the, what is it called? The Preble Street, all the racism and stuff and xenophobia that we heard day to day, what would Kamala's plan be to stop that kind of stuff? Or do you think it would still happen?
Stop what?
The xenophobia and making sure that the homelessness and schools aren't near each other, near the immigrant kids and stuff.
Rob, you want to take it?
First of all, what's your name?
Davis, yeah.
Davis. That's fine. Thank you. It's good to
Herrick.
It's good to hear from you and hear a question. That's one of those things where, the president of any country can't get down to that local. I think that's a Portland issue. That's very much a Portland issue. How can Portland do something? And I know that they've tried to move Preble Street, right? They've tried to move the homeless services elsewhere. I know they've done some of that. But why don't we, here's something to think about, is xenophobic speech is still free speech. And so you may not be able to say it in the classroom, but it's very hard to protect people from hate speech, from horrible things that are said to be, because it is free speech. And so if we restrain somebody from saying something that is hateful, we're also going to have to restrain people from criticizing people who are xenophobic. If we start restraining speech, the horrible thing is that these young people have to listen to it. And that's, I don't know if any president can really get to that, but I'm sorry to hear that you had to go through that, because it is very difficult. Yes.
Well, let me add, also to what Rob said. This problem is typical, especially for when new immigrants come, and people, have difficulties dealing with it. It takes a while to unfamiliar, new faces, a new culture, new languages, and there is a phase that's important that they go through, and that's the role of the community leaders and the teachers to have conversations, let people express their ideas and their fears and also their anxieties about it, but not to shut them up, but also tell them, to get to know the students, get to know the newcomers. And through conversations, some will be persuaded. Some probably, of course, they will say, I don't care. I don't want foreigners here. But in all cases, not just Portland, Maine, which is dealing with the diversity issue, and Lewiston, and now also we have Biddeford dealing with that as well. But this is a pattern, a stage when newcomers come, like the Vietnamese. I'll give you an example of Vietnamese refugees in the 1970s, before you were born, maybe. And there was a lot of prejudice against both people. And now, they are really part of Maine fabric, and they are integrated and assimilated in Maine. Our neighbor in Saco was a Vietnamese American. And I have people whom I know. There is a lady who had a wonderful restaurant in Biddeford that we go to. She has a very terrific Vietnamese restaurant. And I think that's the point here, is that it's a phase, an early stage. And the good news in American society, after a while, people become more comfortable. People will be more aware of the newcomers. They talk to them. They go to school. Their kids go to school with them. They dine with them. And that xenophobia and prejudice, listen and listen and listen. But this is, I'm afraid, Dave, that's not really new in American history. We have both xenophobia and racism, and we also the wonderful fact that we are a society of immigrants, and 51 million Americans were born outside the United States. So this is also, we need to look at both, because we're dealing with really, when we don't know somebody, you get really afraid of them. And might I say, a good college education should really not shut people off, but educate them and let them feel more comfortable, and be listening to the other one. And that's why we try to insist that in our core and our classes, that we be open-minded and we explore and examine. Come on, guys, don't be quiet. You remember the credit I talked about earlier.
As you all think of questions, I'll say one more thing is, what can be done, first of all, is we create communities. And so what's happened, for example, I know at Casco Bay High School, there's a Jewish club, right? My daughter goes there, and her friend who's Jewish is in the Jewish club, right? Maybe a few years ago, he might not have been thought about it. But now with all the anti-Jewish and all the, and all the anti-Semitism and all the, he feels this, her friend feels a sense of, wanting to belong. So I think one thing that we can do is find places where we belong and create belonging where we are. That's not a president that's going to do that. That's going to have to be civil society that does that sort of thing. And here we have clubs, of course, at UNE. We can, we have lots of different clubs that people can join based on their identity.
Mm-hmm. Questions, guys?
We got one over there.
Is it Ra? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, as a non-Mexican or as a non-American born American, do you feel like it's your job to make those inclusive spaces, or do you feel as though it's our job to help you with that inclusivity?
It takes two sides. But I always feel like, as I shared, remember in our discussion last night, I kept sharing with you guys in the class my own ignorance about the new society I came to as a young man. And by being really open about my, and familiarity with American culture and society, and my own lack of knowledge and ignorance about a lot of things, then that's a sign where we shouldn't judge quickly. That's the point, and that goes both ways about American society, but also young people in our society. They need to wait a little bit before they judge the newcomer to get to know them. So it's going to take both patience and openness. You don't have to agree, but at least patience. And I want to know about you, and I want to tell you about me. And that's the beginning of finding common ground and humanize people both ways. And then after that, slowly become trust and ease and talking about maybe the Patriots and the Seahawks, and hopefully the Seahawks will continue to roll despite the fact they are terrible so far. But that's a different story.
Regarding the topic of immigration, both of my parents are immigrants. They're both from Nigeria.
Yes.
So not necessarily the areas that people are looking at. But regarding immigrants who are coming here for, per se, like education or work, and not from these areas that are being highly criticized, what do you think their experience is going to be like during this election time and even after? Do you think they might be targets of the same sort of speculation, or do you think they might have an easier experience?
What do you think first? And I'll share with you my reflection. What do you think?
Well, I think my parents have had a very, very positive experience here. Nothing per se to say that anyone has ever mistreated them in any sort of way. But yeah, my experiences from any sort of experience in that side has been positive so far.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm an immigrant too. I'm from Canada, which, hardly counts. But the rhetoric during these election campaigns, just to answer your question and to address it directly, it really wears on you. So when Donald Trump was first running, however many years ago that was, I'm here legally, I own a home, I have a job, I've been here almost 20 years. I would wake up in the middle of the night frantically looking for my immigration records. Where's my green card? Do I have it on me? I'm supposed to carry it with me all the time. I don't. Where are my vaccination papers? What's my status? Where's that stuff? And even now, that's sort of waned a little bit. But, did I tell the, immigration services the last time I moved like I was supposed to? Are they going to come for me? And it's not just the stuff that's in the election cycle. It's sort of this constant drone. And so when I hear things like this in the news about the Springfield, Ohio, right? Like I feel this moral obligation to then go talk to my 4-year-old kid about this stuff so he understands, which it's just sort of it's just kind of underlying there. And Rob, you talked about the Mexican border. I lived in Tempe, Arizona, and I used to have to go down to Nogales and renew my visa every so often. And so my friends would be out buying, tequila and prescription drugs and whatever. And I was, in the room, and I'd be waiting in line. I'd have all my papers, whatever. And I would see people coming in chains and people being, dropped off on the other side in a truck. And it was that feeling that I was so lucky. I was so lucky to have what I needed and be, here legally and have these opportunities. But I would ask your parents. It's really, I'm really glad you asked that question. Because even as I sit here listening to both of you, I think about that a lot and how my experience has been different from others.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And I'm glad you shared with us your own insights. All immigrants, David, they ponder and they reflect about these things because you are really coming to a new society and you are outsider. The worst part of it is that now we are treating these immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers as the other. And even the one who, like your parents, who came to America in a legal way, and there are millions of Americans who came a legal way, which is the right way, of course. Except that sometimes when you have wars, violence, that's why people become refugees. The Jewish people, during the Holocaust fled Europe and tried to escape for their lives and their families. And, unfortunately, in America, some were turned off. But also, people have different experiences. I mean, when I came to America as a graduate student, I was lucky. I came to a very, very welcoming and open city. A city that welcomes strangers and outsiders. And that impacted me so much to the point that after I finished my English courses, I changed my plan. Instead of going to a big Eastern school, I stayed in Seattle and I enrolled at the University of Washington. So we have different experiences, but there is no escape, whether you came legally or illegally and became a citizen or a resident. It takes a while, not only in America, in any society, it takes a while to become really comfortable. And your children might have easier time, but this is part of life. There are some of it, we have to deal with it as is, but some of it, it could be nasty as what are these legal Haitian immigrants who were in the United States in Springfield, Ohio, legally. And they are being targeted as somebody barbaric, somebody really who is criminal, and that's very painful and harsh. And we need to kind of be able to talk about that. But that's really the unfortunate reality. There are the realities of adjusting with the new society and feeling outsider. And then slowly, hopefully, you'll become a citizen and your children will have a better time. But we are not talking about paradise. We're talking about real human beings that are complex and that are also complicated for even legal immigrants like your parents, David. Other questions? Yeah.
This is probably like a loaded question without a good answer, but you were saying earlier about the solutions to the border crisis, and I was wondering if we ever came up with a solution that kind of like helped with both national security and humanitarian crisis, like if there was anything we've thought of as plans that we just haven't used, or if we haven't even like been thinking about solutions at all, and we've just been kind of reacting to the immigration.
That's a very good question, Jackie. And I would say few thoughts. I have few thoughts about this, and I let Professor Alegre, if he wants to. There is a problem. Let's not, try to sugarcoat it or try to, be blind about it. There is a problem, a legal problem when it comes to illegal immigrants at the southern border, a security problem. And we need to be really honest about it. The problem is our federal, our Congress and our political leaderships are paralyzed because of the division in our government. And instead of the compromise that Professor Alegre mentioned, Republican and then Democrats adopting it, and it's supposed to be sensible, having more troops, more security people, more people who are filing these applications for asylum or not, or don't have to wait for a long, long time because of the volume there of people there. That's, to me, the first step is you have to have realistic problem dealing with security. President Trump did not invent the problem when he said there is a security problem. Where he's off is to demonize and criminalize and dehumanize these immigrants and refugees. But there is a problem, and we, as public opinion, we need to kind of keep insisting on a bipartisan solution that's both firm and ensure the security, but also humane and also legal and consistent with our asylum process and references in that sense. And this hasn't been done, but I think we need to do it for the sake of everybody. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be a national issue.
Thank you for that question. The word solution, we love solutions, but oftentimes there aren't solutions. And the one thing, again, as a historian, I look at this as as basically the history of migration, right? As a species, we have migrated first out of Africa, of course, and then throughout, through wars, famine, all kinds of things make people migrate. And so the nation state, the idea of having these firm boundaries really is maybe 200, 300 years old, right? It's not that, it's a new idea, right, of highly restricting migrants in this way. It's only, I think, going to, now maybe it'll get better for a little bit, but with climate change, things are going to be exacerbated, right? We're not just going to see migration from outside into this country, but, we're going to see a lot of internal migration, right? Miami's underwater. Miami is below water. How are certain communities, can you live in Texas when it's 130 degrees? So there is going to be a ton of climate. There already is, but there's going to be more climate migration. So in terms of solutions, I don't know if there are solutions. I will remind people, and those of you who are not alive, you don't know this, but in 1986, there was an amnesty for immigrants. You may not know this. 3 million undocumented immigrants, not overnight, but in a quick while, became residents and became legalized. And the president was a Republican, Ronald Reagan. Right? Why would a Republican allow and even encourage immigration? From the business perspective, it's good for employers because they get low wage people, right? So they get low wage workers. So anyway, that could be a perspective to look at it. So instead of demonizing, we could say, hey, look at all the low wage workers that we can bring in to work in Maine, right? To construct houses. To develop the economy, right? We could, Maine is historically a poor state. Typically, immigrants build economies. So we could have a pro-immigrant solution or policy. That's all a matter of really the disposition of the people. If we were to, if Kamala Harris said, let's give an amnesty, and she was like, well, Ronald Reagan did it, people would be like, well, I'm sorry. Right, that's not going to happen. She wouldn't get elected, right? She wouldn't get elected.
Yes.
So anyway, that's what I will say.
All right, let's see if there is one final question, class.
Personally, I think we should have therapists at the southern border to vet people who may also have mental health problems instead of the military. Just a thought.
That's a very, very kind and humane comment. I think the fact that they're not citizens and they are, ordinary people who are seeking security and freedom in a country, and with children, we will see more also with children. That's not a bad idea, Davis. We need to see the humanity of these people and not see them as the criminal other. That's for sure. That's for sure. I want to thank all of you for coming to our UNE Constitutional Day. I would like to thank Lee and David for being always gracious and helpful to us. Please take some of the pizza to your dorm or to your classmates or to your co-workers. And I want to thank my dear friend and colleague, Rob Alegre, for sharing with us his knowledge about Latin American history and the background and the social origin of this crisis in the 6 countries I mentioned. And enjoy the weather, and I'll see you later. Thank you all.